Exercise set 3.3, Evaluating Arguments by Analogy, from a Workbook for Arguments by Morrow and Weston. Every argument by analogy compares two things. To make a judgment about how well an argument by analogy follows Rule 12, you need to think systematically about how similar those two things are. To do this, it helps to structure your thinking in terms of 4 questions. These are the 4 questions. Question 1. In what ways are the two things similar? Question 2. How is each of these similarities relevant to the conclusion? Question 3. In what ways are the two things different? And question 4. How is each of these differences relevant to the conclusion? The author of an argument by analogy is likely to list some of the ways in which the two things are similar. And in addition, you might be able to think of some more. However, the author probably isn't going to point out the differences between the two things. It's essential that you, as a careful critical thinker, think about what those differences are. If you don't have a list of both the similarities and the differences, you can't make an informed judgment about the argument. In this exercise set, you're more likely to have to do a little bit of research to find the important differences than you will to find the important similarities. The argument is likely to list the important similarities, although you can usually dig up a few more of them. What about the other 2 questions? To explain how a similarity is relevant to the conclusion, you'll need to argue that the similarity gives you a reason to think that the conclusion is true. Likewise, to explain how the differences are relevant, you'll need to argue that the differences give you a reason to doubt that the conclusion follows. It can often be hard to articulate why a similarity or difference is relevant. If you find yourself at a loss for words, imagine that you're explaining the similarity to a child. Start from the very beginning and state all of your assumptions as plainly as you can. You might find it helpful to proceed systematically through some of these questions. First, generate a list of important similarities. Then, go through each similarity on the list and construct a brief argument to show that the similarity gives you a reason to think the conclusion is true. Third, generate a list of important differences. And then, go through each of the differences on your list and explain why the difference gives you a reason to doubt that the conclusion is well established by this analogy. Once you have compiled your list of the important similarities and differences, and you understand why these similarities and differences are relevant, you need to make a judgment call about whether the similarities outweigh the differences, or vice versa. Now, other people might not always agree with your judgment call. In that case, there's sometimes nothing you can do to convince these people except to try to come up with a different argument. And this is one of the great weaknesses of arguments by analogy.